Thank you, Katie. Thank you very much, Katie.
It's muted.
So, you want to go there, Ronaldo? No. Come on.
There's too much in the reduction.
You want to? You can sit there.
Cool. Sitting, most people don't see me, it's great.
Alright. Alright. Good. Thank you for having us. This is a recycled talk from DroidCon 2 years ago, but we've taken the time and updated it a little bit. So some stuff happened, so we've updated a bit. And the presentation itself is open source, so you don't need to take any notes. You just clone that repository. It's a markdown file. If you find a typo, keep it and pull request it. We work at Sensorberg. We build an SDK at Sensorberg. We do like iBeacon stuff and geofences and Android and iOS, and Windows, and we have lots of open source software. I forced my colleague Ronaldo to be with me. So Ronaldo, please say hi.
Hi.
Is it muted?
No.
No, good.
No. Yeah. Yep, so I've started on Sensorberg about 3 months ago. So it's mostly his presentation, but there have been some learnings and some stuff to show as well. You can find my Git there. I was here even last year. For the guys that come on every meetup, might remember my talk about Recycler-View. I like it. It was cool. And yep, and as it says, proud that since last year.
I'm Falco. I've been with Sensorberg a little longer. I'm a little longer proud dad. You can find all my profiles there, and I try to fly more small things. And we've got a little R moment, and this has been one, and this is the second one. Okay.
No one cares.
Why do we think we are qualified to talk about SDK building? Well, we have one at Sensorberg. It's open source. There's the URL, and we've tried to kind of take the best practices that we've kind of gathered over the years and put into this presentation. All the samples are from actual code, and I've tried to also link it. So even if you want to follow up afterwards and find this, I don't know, settings Java file, it's linked. And it used to be live at least. It doesn't necessarily mean it was live, it's live now, but at least it used to be live, so not a lot of bullshit in this presentation. There's some general thoughts, like listen to your customers. We like to build features with a customer, but we also like to ignore customers and make up our own mind, so that's kind of what you always have to find. And as usual, release early, release often. One thing you have to kind of really keep in mind when building an SDK or a library, you really have to think twice about everything. Like moving a file to another folder, package change will break the build of your customers or the people who use your library. So you really need to be very, very careful. If you've just been building apps, this is another level. And even the smallest things can have a big impact. It's kind of really one of the bigger, the one thing that you really have to keep in mind. Logging, we've had at least 2 iterations on logging. We've written our own little logging wrapper. Obviously logging is important, but also you don't want to ship anything that logs, because you don't want to have your part in your customer's app log and kind of fill up the loghead. So disable it by default, but kind of find a way to turn it on, and it's something we should keep in mind. We have actually gone and, Ronaldo recently switched to this very nice logger library, and we forked it, or he forked it, so that it works better in our SDK, to kind of not be too verbose unless you want it. So there's a fork, and we're going to hopefully it's all merged, so we'll see.
Yeah, about the fork is, mostly there's one feature that I saw a lot of people request on the original thing, that to do a file login as well. And it's been for years, they're like, I want a file log, and we needed a SensorBurg file log as well, so I just went myself and did it. And interesting from a library point of view, you don't want to be clashing with a host app logger. So it's the type of stuff you have to have in mind. And this library was fully static. It's just static call everywhere. So at least I hook up some method that I could get an instance and use just my instance on the library to not mess up with the host application. Yeah, as Falco said, hopefully gets merged soon in the main branch.
So there's a pull request. If anyone wants to help, vote it up. Regarding testing, obviously you should do a lot of testing. We went for the very simple path, and I still like it very much. Nothing fancy, JUnit 4, Espresso with devices. So we didn't try to reinvent the wheel, and we really concentrated on coding, and it's really been working out. So it's nothing like artificial androids and all these fancy new things. That's what we did. In general, when people think about building a library in SDK, we would recommend build an app with it, something that basically highlights everything that you do. And we've come up with a little thing called developer mode. You go to the settings and tap on the version name 7 times, and it unlocks this developer mode, so you can have even more options in your app. Build lots of samples, basically try to play customer. Be your own customer. It's really hard to think like your customer, so play your customer, build apps. That's really important. Releasing, we've originally started and published artifacts to GitHub pages. I'll show you how we did it in the next slide. But that's all gone, and we didn't have our own public nexus. We're now using JCenter and Jetpack. So that's really good that these two projects exist. And you can still see there's a branch inside of our project which contained the artifacts, which is a little violent on GitHub and Git, but that's what we did. Basically, to use Git as a Maven repository, we built these 2 Gradle files, which basically check out the Git repository, deploy to a file, and then push that repository, and you can directly link to it. So you have to, once you do this, you kind of appreciate how easy and comfortable regular releases are, because you have to manually make sure that you're not re-releasing something. You never want to release something again, because your clients and whoever is using it will hate you, because your artifact changed and they can't do reproducible builds, and snapshots in a different place and all that kind of stuff. So it's really it's an interesting experience to build yourself, but then again, use JCenter.
On this part on the releasing, we all know how on Android Studio create a new project, JCenter is already there, and it's something. Actually, I wrote a ticket on our system yesterday to for sure open source it. It's a pain in the ass to write the whole Gradle parts to actually upload that. And I remember there was the one from, it's one of the Google developers that is always on Twitter, I forgot his name now. I think was Chris Baines, yes, and had a very good one that was to push to Sonatype. And so I wrote a ticket and hopefully going to enter next sprint and going to actually do something to make it nice. You can just apply Gradle script from that location, have a properties file with the parameters. And yeah, it's important the releases, but as currently stands, what's been given to us developers, it's not such a great tools. So we try to always improve in open source, and others can try to help more.
Okay, everybody I guess knows Jetpack, so we can skip over that one. So originally I want to talk about architecture, and we used Volley back then, and I was really proud because we were able to mock server requests and mock callbacks and all that kind of stuff. And we found that RX Java is actually quite useful for us, not just because it's the hippest, coolest thing currently on Earth, but it really makes things testable, and you can kind of see in the background, and we have a flow of information. And
yeah, this part, when you're moving into RX, that's not so related to build an SDK directly, but when we start moving to RX, because it's kind of as this super powered bus of events, we try to really abstract towards this data flow that we needed to actually go, I need to load this from a backend, and I need this other information from a different backend. On our case, we need to read Bluetooth, aggregate the data. So we really had this proper block structure. And whenever you have this block structure, then you know it's there exactly the classes you need to build, one flat map in the next, a map in the next, and because they're very well defined interface on the RX world, it's for the testing part. It's just like though I'm passing this data, I should be receiving those data back, and it's very simple to have something nice balance.
Okay. And kind of what we're planned for the future, we're planning to modularize the library. So there is a base module and some like additional modules, so you can kind of pick and choose what kind of functionality you want. And it's like, once you want to do this, really be careful and don't do it like the Google Play Services, because Google Play Services gives you a full package and then the individual parts as individual packages. So it's like, we actually can't use Google Play Service because of that, because if we reference one of them, most likely one of our customers has the other part, and it's really horrible. So really modularize it, and you can be sure that stuff works. And to quote Ronaldo, we're going to use a tiny bit of reflection, and then we can find these dependencies dynamically.
Yeah, if it's just a little static initializer, reflection sometimes flow around like it's this big bad dog that's gonna, it's horrible for your performance, but it's one static initializer. It's not like it's gonna slow down your scrolling on a list. And I think we don't have a slide on that, but I would say if you're planning to make separate modules, there's this thing that's you don't see so often, is the provided keyword on Gradle. That is simply states, look, this library here, I know it exists, but don't pack it with my actual AAR file. So you're gonna build and gonna pretend this stuff exists, but don't pack it with me. And later on, the host system is gonna try to find all the class loaders. So that makes it possible to have the core module, and the other modules assume the core exists, so you can have the core and add it up as needed. Yeah, it's kind of the way to go.
Of course, dependency injection goes without saying. Do it, really makes your life happier. We've created one like specialty. You probably have like magic numbers and magic values in your app. But if you're a library, if you're an SDK, that's really a pain in the butt. So we try to abstract all of the magic numbers away, and we even made them changeable remotely. And we basically do that for everything. Like, even if we don't know if we want to change them at some point, our code gets shipped with a customer's app, and then we find out that we need to change it, but they have got a weird release cycle, you can't get into it, so you want to abstract all those magic numbers away from it, and ideally build like a remote API for it. That's our settings Java. It's pretty simple, key value store, and kind of takes away that pain. And we really like every special number, iterations, retries on network, just put them in there and make sure everybody's using them.
Yeah, and on the implementation details of that, yeah, there's an endpoint, there's a key value pair basically. You don't want to make it too difficult on your SDK to actually access those values, and it's going to be on the next release. This new way we found out is there's this Pojo generator. Is that it's an open source that I've been using. That during compilation time, it will read the JSON file and generates a Pojo object from it. So JSON can automatically create with the default values that is shown inside that JSON. And a JSON, you can very easily get the iterable from it to the key values of it and just replace. So it's make very straightforward to have a new value you add to the JSON on your code. And if this value exists on the server, it's going to arrive on the retrofit, and you merge with your current JSON and then build an object, and you have all your values there. The default ones and the ones that come from the server. Again, it's one we don't have an example now, but it's going to be on the next release of the SDK, so if you're interested, it's a very easy way to have modular settings.
Good. Feature flags is again something you can argue about, but it also enables you to ship code that is not so much tested, and then you can enable it later. And we kind of have to find out if this modularization is kind of under the same concept, but we found feature flags to be quite powerful. Again, you ship them by your settings. Because again, you ship code, library, and in our case, we kind of sell it, so our customers incorporate it. Most likely they don't like it, so we really have to fight for updates. So you want to be ready to enable and disable stuff. Also if it breaks, like if our Bluetooth scanner goes wild on some weird new device, you want to be able to turn stuff off. So feature flags, even for the weirdest functionality, probably makes sense. And again, customers could already test stuff that is not really deployed or the other way around, so feature flags really make sense. One way to also activate feature flags, and for instance logging, we found is these secret codes. I don't know if anybody knows them, but you go to the dialer and you type star pound a number and then pound star, and an intent is being generated automatically, and if you register for that intent you can do stuff. And we're using this, for instance, to turn on logging at runtime. So if I don't know, we have an app, maybe a customer's app that's behaving weirdly, we can kind of go this route and enable logging, and then maybe find the problem. And in the background, you can see there's an app. It's in Play Store. It also scans for these codes. It's also interesting to look who's actually been implementing this. It's super straightforward. You have a receiver, and you have to declare it in your manifest, and that's it. So it's something to think about. Some people could argue that it's a security risk, because basically you've got an undocumented API, but we only do it for logging, so it could help. And then we only do it at runtime, so you restart the app, that flag is not persisted. So you can argue that it's a good thing. We actually had our app tested, talking about it's a good thing and secure. I don't know if they in general make sense, but we actually had an external security review, and one of the things that they found, and I think most of other SDKs do it, where you put your API key into the manifest, into a meta tag. And it's openly readable by anyone. And if your API key is something, is considered secure or like a method of authentication, forget about it. Everybody without a permission can read everybody's manifest meta tags. So you could probably take any crash reporting libraries and find their IDs and scan them. So don't put anything in your manifest. There's no permission needed. And that's something they found. We never really thought about it, because it's actually good to have someone kind of look at a library from a security perspective. Talking about dependencies, as with the first slide, you need to be extra careful when you build an SDK or a library. You need to be forwards and backwards compatible. So think about how does a library behave, like retrofit, for instance. they think about how version 2 and version 3 of retrofit could exist in parallel. And basically for every library you choose, you have to kind of think about, okay, will there be a next release? And will this next release collide with my app? Because again, you're going to produce dependency collisions. Most of them today, most of the libraries kind of today are smart about it, but you need to keep that in mind every time you choose a library. And then you can kind of update your SDK regularly, but then again you have customers who are using the old dependency and then they can't update you, and it's a real pain in the butt. One way of kind of dealing with this is like cloning all your dependencies, changing the package name and packaging them again, which has its downsides as well. Yeah, there's no real good solution to this. So if you have to, and you have one dependency that you really need to include, but you know they really have weird update behavior, or there's still a lot of people using the old version, you have to go this route. Security. It's one thing to ship an app, because then kind of getting to your code, you have to rely on people having root devices, and it's not very easy. Well, most of the people probably in this room, they find it very easy, but there is a certain hurdle. If you build a library, even when it's not open source, there is nothing in the middle. They download your jar or your AAR, extract the jar. There's all your source code. This is from Dex to jar. Everyone who's ever decompiled Android apps, this is even easier. So it's a concern you need to think about. We are open source anyway, so there's nothing we can hide. But if you try to hide some business logic, you need to be really careful and obfuscate again and write probably weird code so that the obfuscated code looks even weirder. This is one of the advantages of being open source. We don't have to worry about it. For instance, also on SSL pinning, we don't have SSL pinning integrated on purpose, because again our customers have to trust us, and then they could override our certificate check if they wanted to. Plus, if our certificate changes, then they would have to update the app and it might break. So even simple security measures you can question them when you integrate them. We ship a ProGuard file since last year. So be a nice citizen and prepare your host application to use obfuscation. I don't have personal experience with DexGuard, but you have to always think about stuff like that as well. If your customers are using DexGuard, you should probably prepare for that. And again, if you ship a wrong ProGuard file, most likely a host app will crash and you're being responsible, so really be careful about what you're doing. And then again, it helps to test, have your own app that you built that we've mentioned earlier, use ProGuard so that actually your app crashes before your customer's application crash. We've been recently switching to Bitrise, and Ronaldo's kind of leading this move, so what is Bitrise? Who knows Bitrise in here? Okay.
It's not an advertisement for Bitrise. They are their own business and have no affiliation to it. Interesting enough, 2 days ago I've been checking a Twitter thread about what's the CI you like the most. There was the common guys like Jenkins and Travis, but then there's like a million I've never heard about, and everyone has its own preferred. But the point is, you need the builds always there, you need snapshots, you have to be testing always on the latest, and you have to find a tool that is comfortable for you. That was the comfortable I found for me, because it's a pretty UI, and actually everything on them is open source. There is one of those step modules that was not doing exactly what I wanted. I've managed to clone it, fork it, change the little part of the step I wanted differently, and from the UI I just point to my fork instead, and the thing works with it. So I would suggest, if you don't know and you use CIs, you need to use CIs. It's one on Jenkins. Every module on it is I always felt to be very hidden somehow, and all of those is just a little Bash script or a little Python script or Ruby script, and one of those steps they have available is even like, hey, run a script here. You write whatever you need. You need to move some files. You need to do obfuscation, save some stuff. It has some pretty strong thing. And back to the CI then, and to test often, you have to be on the latest, and you have to let your work colleagues use the latest to see where stuff will go wrong. You can see in one the workflows, we push into hockey, so then all our colleagues already get updates and start testing on the new stuff. And even there was an option I personally loved it. I can tag the branch and then upload to Google Play in alpha version already. So whenever you're preparing a release, it's already there. You just have to final check on your device that that's really the release, and on Google Play say move to production. And yeah, use a CI, make your CI run tests.
The upside of Bitrise, from my perspective, also the whole configuration is a YAML file which needs to be checked in, which is good for you guys, because if you want a complicated Bitrise YAML file, you can just go to our repository. But basically, you don't have like a Jenkins with plugins and configurations in parallel. So they take the same approach as Travis, and you have your code evolve with your CI script. And you should be able always to go back, which is a real advantage. And as you can see, they all have all kinds of functions built in, and then you can plug in. So it seems like a very cool service.
Yeah, that was an example, carry on the CI. One of the projects I saw, one of those side apps, testing apps on Sensorberg I saw when I arrived, they had like 4 or 5 build types and 3 other build flavors, and just to sync, Gradle sync, I would go get a coffee, come back, and still trying to sync the thing. It was a pain in the ass. And yeah, you can minimize a lot of this if you just have parameters for everything, and then you let your CI do the parameters depending if you did a pull request, or you just start a job manually, or if you have a tag, or if you merge in certain branch. So there it's just showing how you can get from system environments. For example, the version code that comes from system environment is always updated on the CI from the build number, but then the integer 2 there is whenever we're going to do manual releases on Google Play. And then all the CI can override the app ID, even the actual your package naming, so you can have your debug build from the IDE, and then your CI version by side and compare. So it's interesting to optimize our workflow, have parameters for stuff. Okay.
Kind of coming to an end, we've collected some challenges that we haven't fully tackled yet. The first challenge would be independent crash reporting. Most of the apps do crash reporting on their own, but we then rely on the host app sending us crash reports, and usually they set a global exception handler, but we would still try, and maybe later in Q&A if somebody has an idea, we will open for suggestions. We run on our own process, so that might help, but a global crash interceptor would not help, because then we would interfere with the host application. So that's something that we maybe like to solve in the future, to like build our own exception, global exception handler, but not so global. And then a different challenge, very unique to us, where like if our apps, if 2 apps on the same phone have our library included, then they'll both scan for beacons, and like lots of stuff will be done in duplication. So we are actually one of the few companies probably who would kind of benefit from a real library approach or a real system service without having to install a separate app. And maybe we could at some point spend time and kind of find out via IPC that one of the apps elects the other app to do part of the logic, and then we can save the battery of the consumer. Well, that of course all needs to be secure, so it's we're still not sure if we actually want to tackle this. And then another challenge, also going back to dependencies, you could try to package all your dependencies into a fat AAR. In Java world, there is the concept of a fat jar, which actually takes all your dependencies and puts them into your jar. And I have yet to find a solution for this. This was more important a couple of years ago when people didn't really know what AAR was, and maybe they can include an AAR, but also getting other dependencies somewhere. There's this fat jar plugin, but that's again a jar plugin, and that doesn't help with an AAR. That's basically it. There are some backup slides. Like we actually ran into the multi-dex issue, but I don't think it's 2017. That's really important. Again, slides are there. If you find any typos, feel free to pull request them. Now Q&A. Questions, anyone?